Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may not have prepared you for. As always, I am AJ, and across from me, Jason. Jason, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, AJ. I got back from vacation yesterday, so coming off of that's a little rough, man.
I don't know that word anymore. Vacation.
I know. You know what is a time period? Now this was a 2-day weekend vacation, let me say that. But the kids are out for fall break, and it was the beginning of it, and we're like, well, fall's coming, fall's here, so let's try to sneak out for a weekend, and it was good. But I got in late last night, and so I'm tired.
Wait, so your kids are already on fall break?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it gets earlier and earlier. Yeah, ours
isn't off until like October.
I know.
And we had a beach trip planned, but school got in the way, and there was no way that both my wife and I could take them down to the beach and still having to deal with schoolwork because we're not on fall break.
Yeah. I mean,
it just wouldn't have been fun.
We're a little luckier than most, you and I, because we're in academia, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes our schedules line up with our kids and stuff like that, but that does not happen for me at the present. So, like I say, it wasn't able to get away for the week, but we were able to sneak out for the weekend type thing. So
that's good.
Yeah. But so yeah, not bad. How about you? Did you have a good weekend?
Just watched sports and did schoolwork. That's about it. That's my life now.
There you go. And it will be for a couple more years.
It is. It will. And that's fine. I got into it knowing it and I'm going to get out of it some way. So, well, let's get into today's episode. Today's episode, last episode we talked about understanding opportunity. And one of the concepts that we talked about with opportunity is understanding and being able to recognize opportunity, but also see it kind of as a little bit of a risk because you don't know where that opportunity is going to lead you. And we talked about, taking that risk, taking that opportunity because it could lead to other things. And then I got to thinking about, we have never talked about risk. And I thought maybe that would be a really good episode. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is understanding risk because we use it very generally. And, it's you need to understand it before you take it on. So what do you think about
that? I mean, couldn't be a better topic. I tell my students all the time, I was like, there's two words that are used particularly in business that are the most misunderstood. And those are risk and strategy.
Yeah.
Everybody uses them, but nobody really gets their head around what they mean and how significant they are in your life. So there you go.
Yeah. It seems like most of them just take on they use risk as a way to justify a decision without really thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, before we jump in, though, I want to remind everybody, hit us up on our website, Reschool'd.com. That's Reschool'd with a D, not an ED. And check us out on our social media profile handles. Now, you guys, if you have something you want to hear about, let us know. Send us a message. Drop us a line in any way. You can contact us right there off our website. And then, of course, we need those stars, those approval ratings on the popular podcasting platforms. So, do that too. We appreciate it.
Make us feel good about ourselves.
There you go.
Well, quick question of the day. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this, but I want you to grade yourself on your level of risk acceptance. And by that, I mean, an F would mean you're extremely risk averse, and an A would mean you're extremely risk accepting. So what are your thoughts?
Sadly and strangely enough, I would give myself a D on risk acceptance. I am low risk. Well, I have my risk tolerance is not very high, and I've always wanted it to be more. Mm-hmm. I've always tried to look at things and try to see the opportunity in them, and not let my understanding of the risk involved drive my decision. But I've never been able to get there, so I got to give myself a D. What about you?
I would probably say I'm more. I would say probably like a B. Mm-hmm. I am more accepting of risk to a point of almost detriment too. Just because it's not that, and this is what we're talking about today on this episode. My problem with risk and my risk acceptance level is not because I have a problem with being risk acceptance. My problem is that I tend to jump into things too quickly and not make calculated, decisions on risk. So me personally, I'm more risk accepting, but it doesn't always pan out the way it should be, if that makes sense.
Well, no, I mean, that's pretty interesting there. And it's probably a good segue into what we should talk about first.
Yeah.
What is risk? Like, because, I think most people's understanding of what risk is, like people look at the same scenario and say, this is risky versus not. What does that mean? Like, I mean, how do two people see two things differently, the same situation? Or why does one person accept one situation versus another?
Yeah. Yeah. Risk to me is your inability to predict or control the outcome of a situation. That's kind of where my mind goes, because when if you have holistic control over how something's going to end, the results of something, then there's no risk, because as long as you put this in, this is going to what's going to come out. Whereas risk is you don't know the other side. You don't know. There's some. You can obviously make assumptions. You can make estimations. If it's dealing with numbers and such, like finances and stuff, you can obviously make estimations, but you don't know it for sure. And that's the defining piece to me, is that unknown. What about you?
Well, I always I never really thought of it much as the unknown. I always thought of it as what could happen to me.
Sure.
Right. Everything's got some probability of happening. We just don't really know what that probability is. Right. And if you're doing something yourself, if it's based on you, your actions are going to change the probability at every stage. Right. You're starting a business. Right. There's some probability that it'll turn into something versus something else. Right. You flip a coin, there's some probability that will come up on heads versus tails. So I always thought of risk as, even if you could assess it, that there is this probability of this occurring, the risk was whatever that probability is of the outcome you don't want.
Yeah.
And,
that makes sense.
there could be a dozen outcomes you don't want. On flipping a coin, there's going to be one or two. Starting a business, it could be it fails. It could be it, kind of fails and creeps along. It could be it major fails, like you get sued and all of a sudden you got $1 million judgment against you, type thing. So there's a bunch of negative outcomes, right? And what's the probability of each of them happening? And there might be a probability of 1 million different outcomes, but are all of them far-fetched, right? The odds of them happening are next to nothing. So you're like, well, let's be real here. I'm looking at this type thing as it's not going to happen. So this is what, and in my mind, that's risk, right? So somebody who's risk averse might see that little potential and not go that route. But again, somebody who's, highly risk tolerant sees it and says, that's not going to happen. And even the upside just looks better to me. Even if it were a higher probability of happening, I'm still going to roll down that road. And then, So anyway, that's what it means for me.
There's a whole industry within business that deals with risk mitigation, enterprise risk management systems.
Oh, yeah.
And what their whole premise is that you're identifying every single possible risk that you can think of, or your team can think of, or whatever, for this situation for your business. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of it is, and this is probably the most important thing if you're going to get anything out of this episode about risk, is you're never going to get rid of risk. Mm-hmm. It's how you mitigate it, how you minimize it based on backup plans or backup plans, those kind of things. And that's really what that system in business does, is it says, okay, there's a possibility, what you're talking about, what is the chances, what are the odds? There's a possibility that this bad thing could happen. And if this bad thing could happen, then it's going to affect my business in this way, this negative way. So here is what I can do right now in order for me to mitigate that risk, because I can't stop it from happening, but I can also control the outcome of it if it does happen based on these backup plans that I have.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I look at like risk and risk management.
So, and I've always been so interested in this topic, particularly because I'm so into entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear people say all the time that entrepreneurs are risk prone. And, I read some pretty interesting research along the line that said they weren't. And the explanation in the research was there's a perception thing there. It's the way they frame situations. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to the self-efficacy or self-belief, right? That they see a situation and they say, okay, I'm going to take advantage of the potential outcome of this situation. And they look at the downside of it. Okay, they're going to invest time and they're going to invest money. So they could lose both of those. But they weigh that against what it could be if they follow this plan they have for it to fruition and bring the business into existence and what that could be. And they're like, the potential return is so much better than the potential for downside. Where somebody else who doesn't tend to be or consider themselves very entrepreneurial focuses on that potential downside. They don't focus on that upside. And because of that, they believe that the probability of the negative outcome is higher than the entrepreneurial type who sees the probability of positive outcome as being higher, or the potential outcome itself, right, being so good in comparison to the negative outcome. And it comes down again to, for lack of a better way to say it, confidence in their own ability to make it work. Yeah. Right? So you got this whole perception in your head, because in reality, somebody's competence will change the probability of an outcome. But I think even if you looked at a coin flip where you had no potential to influence it, then in that situation, the entrepreneur might not be more risk prone, I would say, than somebody who's not. Right? That somebody who's considers themselves highly risk averse. Okay, they might be right along the same path, but if they can add their abilities to the equation, then all of a sudden the same equation shifts for them. So really, the risk is all about perception, and then it comes back into how that perception affects the actual situation, whether your beliefs change the actual risk profile of the situation or not. And, in my mind, life might be like that.
Well, I was going to say too, like, just hearing you talk about that, it really brings the picture to my head about the glass half full, glass half empty kind of perspective. In that I was thinking about when we came up with the podcast idea. I would think, based on what you were saying, that a risk-averse person is probably going to be able to pick out, or strive to pick out, more possible risks than they are successes. They're going to look at it from, this is a risk, this is a risk, this is a risk, this is a risk, and here's the outcome. Whereas I remember when we were going through this, we were looking at it not from a risk acceptance, risk averse, but from an entrepreneurial standpoint. We were looking at it as, this is a positive, this is a positive, this is a positive, this is a positive, and here's a possible negative. And I almost feel like it's from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it's do you see more positives that could come from it, or do you see more negatives that can come from it? And I think that's where it's taken away from, like you said, like people assume entrepreneurs are more risk accepting. It doesn't necessarily have to be dealing with risk accepting. It's just the justification that they put into the outcomes.
And, with me, I've always looked at not the probability of a whole list of negatives. I always look so hard at the severity of a single negative.
Yeah.
Right. And if there is some opportunity for somebody to get hurt, like bad, in an entrepreneurial venture, you're trying to say, is there some possibility that I lose everything? And that is what scares me more than anything else. And even if the probability is minuscule, because it's still there, it bothers me. Where some people won't focus on that at all, right?
Yep.
They'll say it's a minuscule probability. I'm not worried about it, right? It's not going to happen. And so anyway, that's where I get into looking at risk and say people are going to see this differently. Do they focus on the potential negative outcome and the severity of it? Do they focus on the whole laundry list of outcomes they don't want and how likely they are to occur? Do they focus on the potential reward involved or the litany of potential rewards? Or do they focus on that one potential reward, even if it's far-fetched, that it could be? Like, this podcast for us, right? Could it blow up and be something amazing that changes the world? That would be, the most favorable single outcome. Are there a dozen other potential good things that could come? Like, we influence a lot of good people. We make some good connections out of it. We have fun, right? Is there a potential that it turns into a hugely negative thing? Probably not. Other than spending the time and the money to produce it and all that jazz, are there a litany of potential negative outcomes where I don't see too many potential negative outcomes of this? I'd say perhaps the most severe one would be if it caused something like somebody to get really upset with us and all of a sudden we get some kind of legal
hate
battle
mail.
out of it. What's that?
I was going to say some hate mail, and then which leads to something different.
Or a stalker or something like that.
That would be bad too.
Yeah, that would be pretty bad too. Like, what are the one single linear? And I honestly don't see any, like, because it seems to be a very low, potentially, very low likelihood that some major negative will arise like that. Right. AJ, I know the whole world out there would love to just stalk you.
Yes, of course.
But I see the odds of that outcome, right, happening as being very low.
Yeah, probably, unfortunately.
So in this case, this is one I'd say that's extremely low risk and potentially higher reward. So this becomes an easy risk scenario to analyze and say, look, if the time is available and you're not foregoing something else, then why not?
And one of the things that we said before we even started recording the first episode, and I think we've actually said it in one of the really early episodes too, but our mission when we started this was we set the bar so low for our success because, we just want to help people. And our bar set for our mission is we helped one person. If we helped one person, then we feel like we've succeeded. Now, obviously, we want more people to be helped. That's why we keep doing these over and over, different episodes. But our focus was if we could help one person in a situation that they're having in their life, whether it be college life or career, then we feel like we have done our job. And again, that comes from the educator side, I guess, of our background. So that kind of helped with the risk too, because like you said, all those things, those minor negative sides, as long as we succeed in what we're trying to accomplish, then, even at our lowest standard, I think that we've won that battle. We made a good decision.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And so, but at the same time, there's going to be other things that come up in our lives that we're going to have to measure against this too. And that's one thing we didn't talk about, right?
Sure.
Is there some way that the outcome of this, the potential outcome, we start to see it differently?
Yeah.
Right. We do it for a long, long time and we don't feel like we're making an impact. And all of a sudden we see it is taking away from something else.
Sure.
Right. So in life, I guess, a lot of people are saying school, for example. Should I go to school? I'm going to incur debt. I'm going to take away from time of me doing the thing that I'm so passionate about. That type of thing. Is that calculated in the risk? Because you look at, say going to school or taking a job, right? And you say, what's the negative outcome of that? Well, job, you're going to make money. School, you're going to get education. School's going to cost you something, right? The job, perhaps you take this job and it foregoes your opportunity to focus on a different job that you care so much about. Well, how do you weigh the risk in that scenario? And does that come down to your personality type? And do we have some kind of advice or method for assessing it, that type of thing? What's your outlook on that? Do you have any, or maybe just what's your personal outlook? How do you deal with a situation like that? You just made the decision to go back to school while you have a career at the same time. I mean, your wife is about to go back to school, right? Or
she just started right now. School. Yeah, she's just started now. So I mean, and that was to me the bigger risk when it comes to the decisions that we were making with school, because mine, I was already in the career, like I was already in the place that I want to be. And so this is just a way for me to further my career in that place. I'm not making a drastic change in terms of career in itself. I'm just trying to move forward with my career and where I'm at. Hers is a bit different. Hers was, it's a complete career change. I mean, outside of the fact that it's still accounting, it's very different than what she's doing, because she's going from more or less practice to academia. Mm-hmm. And that's a bit of a jump. And when it came to making the decision of that and looking at the risk, there's going to be risks associated with it. And we knew that going into it. Now, there are ways that we've mitigated it to the best of our ability, but there's still going to be risks. And I do think, and obviously, when people think of risk, especially in this situation of us with going back to school and everything, two perspectives come to mind. You've got the financial side, because obviously it's going to cost you to do this. And then the time aspect of it, which is it's going to take a ton of time to do this. I'm learning that even more and more now in my second year, and she's just getting into her first. There's a lot of time that has to be dedicated to it. And so there's two parts to it that are fairly quantitative. I mean, you're talking about numbers in money and numbers in time. Mm-hmm. And the outcome was also, there's a financial impact to it. I mean, obviously that's why we're not going to just waste the money for nothing. There is a financial side to it.
Wait, you're not doing this just for the love of advancement of accounting knowledge?
I almost said something really bad on the air. No. But there's also a time aspect of it for her too. And this is probably a really important part when it comes to risk too, is we tend to really focus in on the quantitative sides of things, but there's also the qualitative side that you have to keep in mind too. And I think there is a very big piece of the qualitative side that went into our decision of her going back, ultimately her decision, but me supporting her decision to go back to school, because she sees my professional life. She sees my career, how I'm dealing in my career. She likes aspects of it. Now, granted, this goes all the way back to the argument that we had a while back that was dealing with happiness versus content. There are aspects to my job that she's not particularly fond of, but there are so many other pieces to my career that she would just love to have. Mm-hmm. And it would make her content. And I think that's what's driving her to go this path. So that was kind of our way of looking at this is yeah, there's going to be risk associated with it. I mean, it could be, and there's and going back to last episode, the opportunity, one opportunity could lead to another opportunity, or a whole bunch of opportunities that could lead to a whole bunch of other opportunities. And those opportunities, obviously they could be dealing with from the risk side. They could be good or bad. And there's this opportunity that she's doing this semester. We've even talked about it in the next year. So her second year of the program, there are possibilities or opportunities that could come up, which even have greater risks. And we're kind of, battling with that right now. And granted, we have a year to get there, but we still want to make a calculated decision based on that, based on what we know and we assume, if we're going to take that risk or not. And again, it comes down to quantitative and qualitative.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up something interesting, and we're obviously, this is on our block to deal with in a different episode, the idea of contentment.
Yeah.
But once again, if you're looking at potential for outcomes that you prefer or want to avoid, right, you have to consider that. You have to consider, what is the ultimate effect going to be on me? Yeah. If you're going to look at the things you value most, right? So security is one thing, but security is something that drives you because it leads to contentment, right? You don't sit around and worry about the risk of loss, Okay, right? Or the risk of negative outcomes. So that type of thing. But anyway, we'll talk about contentment in a different scenario. But it is important to bring that up, because when we talk about assessing risk, you've got to understand what you want out of life.
Yeah.
Right. And in this scenario, like, if you know somebody is not going to be happy given a course of action, even if it looks good, even if it's fruitful, even if it's productive, even if it by all means and measures looks great, then all of a sudden that might be the impetus to choose something that has the potential for a different outcome, but also has a higher probability of a negative outcome.
Yeah.
I see that with people who go into, like, for example, acting or performing of some sort, maybe either popular or fine arts or something like that. It's an extraordinarily difficult field to get in, right? Only a very small percentage of people ever can make a living doing that thing. But so many people are willing to give up everything else to try it. Mm-hmm. They're willing to sell their home. They're willing to move to new locations. They're willing to forego career paths and just work in a given, I don't know. So you always hear about, like, waiting tables and things like that, in order to potentially achieve that outcome, right? To potentially
get that role.
Yeah, get that role, get that opportunity. And they're willing to roll those dice, and they know what the or maybe, again, that comes down to the entrepreneurial scenario. Maybe they're so confident, they have such high levels of self-efficacy that they know they're going to make it. They believe they're going to make it. They don't see the probability of failure as high as I would see it if I went and did that, which, I've never had any acting training, never done anything like that. So the probability of me making it in that area would be very low, right? That type of thing. So,
well, and we've kind of touched on this as we've been speaking, but is risk a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, in my mind, it puts things into perspective. Yeah. Everything's going to have any number of outcomes. Sometimes it's maybe two, good or bad. And sometimes it's going to have potentially a lot of positive, a lot of negative, a few negative, a lot of positive, vice versa, that type of thing. In my mind, understanding this inherent nature that something could be good or bad, then that is positive, right? Your ability to evaluate it is positive. It's actually, I would say, a skill that you can develop, right? Your risk assessment ability. And then I guess you can make better informed decisions about what you want to do with regard to the probability of an outcome. So,
as you were saying that, and when I read the question, it struck me differently, because the question asks, is risk good or bad, or is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think the answer is in the definition of risk. I think it's both, because in order to have risk, you got to have something that's good. But then also you have to have that negative side. Otherwise, if it was all good, then it wouldn't really be a risk. And if it was all bad, then you wouldn't be doing it. So I think inherently risk is both good and bad. And I said in the last episode, I took this seminar thing on risk. And risk, inherently there is a side of risk that deals with failure of some way. Now, whatever that risk failure is, it just depends on the situation, but failure is always is a possibility when you're dealing with risk. And the whole premise of the seminar was to fail early and fail often. The younger you are, the more likely you are to make up for that failure. So if you lose money or whatever, you can make it back up. And then the more you fail, two things happen. One, it shows you that you're trying. If you never fail, then you're not trying. And two, you learn from the failures. Assuming you learn from the failures, that's one of the things you want to do. And when I said that you want to fail early and you want to fail often, meaning you want to take risks, I went back and I thought, that could be taken really badly, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this episode. It's not that you're just taking risk blindly. It's taking risks in a calculated way. You're making calculated decisions based on what you foresee, what you plan out, what you list as potential negative sides, as well as potential positive sides. It's not just simply jumping in the deep end and not knowing what's going to happen and thinking, oh, this is a risk, so high risk, high reward. It is, you are calculating the risks. We knew the risks coming into this podcast when we created it. We set out a list and said, well, this is what it's going to cost us. This is what it's going to take us. This is what we're going to do. This is the expectations. But here's the things that could possibly be positive that could come out of this. And we listed all those, and we realized that the positives were more advantageous to us than we felt that the risks were disadvantageous to us. Mm-hmm. And that was our way of going through this. It was a calculated measure. It wasn't just like, hey, this is a really cool idea, let's do it. We knew kind of going into it, it was going to take work, it was going to take time, it was going to take money, it was going to take, sacrifice. I mean, like I said, I'm in school right now. Jason's transitioning to a new college, and it's something that we assume. Now, did we know that this was going to happen when we first started this podcast? I would venture to say I don't think Jason would have known he was going to change institutes. No. But it was just one of those things that fell in his lap. I mean, he obviously went out for it, but it was good for him, and it was one of those risks that we didn't foresee happening, but we figured out ways around it. Mm-hmm. We set stuff in place early enough to know that we can handle pretty much anything that we can think of. Now, obviously, there's possible things that we may not think of, but we'll cross those bridges when we get there. But that's how I look at risk. Is it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's kind of both. It's inherently in the definition of risk. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that's pretty well put. I mean, and it goes into your whole philosophy of strategy, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is all about strategy. I still firm believer that you can get farther in life with strategy than you can knowledge.
So. Well said. Well, I think that's probably a pretty good closing point to this episode then, right? You get further with strategy than knowledge, and risk is a part of it.
Yeah. Well, one last question though, because I'm intrigued by this. I want to see what your thoughts are, because I'm pretty sure the listeners may want some kind of a little bit of advice, if you will. Can you think of a way that our listeners can exploit risk?
Yeah. Quite frankly, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's all a calculation. So everybody's heard that old adage that higher risk, higher reward. Mm-hmm. But there are scenarios in our everyday life that are not present in the investment market out there, right? Where there's potential high reward and just not that much risk in terms of what are the negative outcomes and what are the probability of those occurring. It's just whether you want to walk down the path and put in what it takes to take advantage of the opportunity, right? Sometimes there's a very slight chance of a negative outcome, a very, very, very slight chance of an extremely positive, and otherwise it's just doing something, right? And I've been, falling victim to that much of my life, right? I end up just doing something, right? And sometimes I'll be proud of it, right? I wrote a book. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do anything with it, but I'm kind of proud that I did it.
Yeah.
Right. That type of thing. So what I would say is understanding this framework that we talked about of risk, reward, based upon probability and things like that, then that is the way you can use risk. You can use it as a tool. You can have an assessment purpose for every situation, and it'll help you in decision making for your career, for your life, just on a daily basis. And quite frankly, trying to dig into something and recognize the probability of a good or bad outcome, it just somehow makes you more aware, mm-hmm. right? It's a deeper level of thought type scenario. Now, I would say my caution is don't let it go too far.
Yep.
Right? Remain optimistic, remain mindful that the way you see a situation might not be the way everybody else sees it, and it might not be accurate, right? So it's a tool like everything else. It shouldn't be the only tool, right? Everybody's heard that thing, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, mm-hmm. right? Don't make your assessment of risk your only hammer. Lawyers are plagued by that.
Yeah.
The reason they tend to make very poor entrepreneurs is because they see risk in everything, and it guides their decisions, where entrepreneurs tend to not be guided by that, right? They see the other side as being more informative. So anyway, that's how that's my take on it. What about you? For how's risk going to be useful or driving force, where you can wield it in your life?
I would say, and I'm going to look at this from two perspectives, because we have the risk averse listeners and we have the risk accepting listeners. If you are a risk averse listener, then usually if you were looking at a situation where you're going to list out all the possibilities and you're risk averse, you're probably going to look at it from, here are all the negative things, outcomes that could happen. I would say, along with that, I'm not saying don't do that, but along with that, also focus on the positives, because I think a lot of times we miss those positives because we're so focused on what possibly could be bad. What's all these negative things, and we don't focus on all the possible opportunities, the good things that come from it. And if you're a risk accepting person, where you generally look at the positive sides and you only get maybe a few negatives, spend a little bit of extra time on those negatives, because you're going to get the whole picture. And the reason why I thought of this, I don't know why it came back, but I remember back when I was in high school and in college, and I think we've talked about this on our dating episode a while back, but I was always scared to death to talk to girls. Like, I was not the person that would walk up to a random girl and start talking to her, because I saw that as so risky. Why? I have no idea. But my sole focus was on the negative outcomes that could be, never really putting much effort into the positive things that could be. Mm-hmm. Because those positive things could lead to, one, I actually hit it off with this person, or two, if you're looking at it from a different perspective, not necessarily dating, but just making contact with somebody, it could lead to networking. It could lead to different opportunities in that side with the networking of possibly getting leads to jobs or contacts where you can get references and stuff like that. I didn't look at it that way. I looked at it as, this could be an utter failure and it's going to be super embarrassing. Mm-hmm. And when it came to that, I was super risk averse. And had I thought about it just for a little bit more and try to put more emphasis on the positive sides, understanding the negatives, but put more effort into the positive sides and understanding, I would have looked at it differently. And so I would say, take the time, no matter what you are, accepting or averse, take the time to look at the other perspective too. That would be my advice.
Well, I think that's as good as it gets. I think that's excellent advice. So, I think we've kind of identified some things for people to think about. Yeah. Like every other episode, it's difficult to give pure advice. It's just something to think about. But yeah, risk is a tool. It's something that if you fully appreciate it, you can use it. So there you go.
Cool. Well, this has been a great episode.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
This has been fun.
A little bit philosophical, a little bit practical. I like it.
I like the philosophical ones, because you can just kind of play around with it, and it's like art. Some people see the art, and some people are like, this is really good, and then other people's like, it's just a blank wall.
Yeah.
But the philosophy side of it, you can kind of look at that. You can justify it in different ways, and people may use it for what they need, or they may not. But hopefully, this has been important for everyone. You got anything to say before we head out?
Yeah, before we get out of here, just remind everybody one more time, hit us up on our website, send us a message, let us know what you want to hear. I mean, if you want a shout out on the episode, as long as it's appropriate, we'll do that, right? Yeah. So anyway, hopefully we'll hear from you. Hopefully you'll continue to follow us. Hopefully you'll give us those likes we need on our podcasting platforms. And there you go.
Yep. Well, we hope you enjoyed the show. We hope to see you next time. And until then, goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to Reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.